Hello everyone. I wanted to go over some of the information on Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is on intellectual disabilities. This week you will have for Chapter 4 discussion board, you'll have the quiz, and also I will add a section called strategies for students identified as ID. So we'll talk about that too at the end of this deal. So if you would go ahead and go to my notes for Chapter 4. If you aren't there yet, go ahead and pause. Go to Blackboard, go to week 4, and you'll see my notes Chapter 4 down towards the bottom. So go ahead and get that taken care of. Pause it and come back. Some of the first things that I have on here are some of the past questions that students had some issues with. So I have the questions along with the page numbers that you can find most of them on to give you an idea of what you need to do. Chapter objectives. You're going to be able to list 3 criteria necessary to qualify for special ed services under IDEA category of intellectual disabilities. You'll be able to identify widely used instruments for assessing intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior and state important issues to consider when interpreting and using such results of such tests, along with be able to describe common characteristics of students with intellectual disabilities and explain how these characteristics are relevant in planning and delivering instructions. You'll also be able to identify factors that might account for the wide differences in the prevalence of intellectual disabilities within school-age population across states and school districts. You'll be able to describe key elements of instruction for teaching academic, functional, and self-determination skills to students with intellectual disabilities, or as we'll start terming it, ID. And then identify factors that should guide planning and placement decisions for individuals with intellectual disabilities. So those are the areas we'll learn about today. The first thing I want you to do is listen to our video, Teaching Students with Cognitive Impairments. So if you will pause me and go ahead and listen to that, and then we'll go from there. I'll let that phone ring, and hopefully they leave a message. IDEA definition. There are 3 criteria for a diagnosis. Significant. Come on. Go to voicemail. There we go. Just declined it. Significant sub-average in intellectual functioning is a score of 2 or more standard deviations below the mean on standardized intelligence tests. An individual must also have a significant difficulty with tasks of everyday living, or what we call adaptive behavior. The deficits must occur during the developmental period to help distinguish intellectual disabilities from some of the other disabilities that might look similar. That's the IDEA definition. Then there's the AIDD definition. Its intellectual disability is characterized by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and in adaptive behavior, as expressed in conceptual, social, and practical adaptive skills. This disability originates before 18. So remember that before 18. We'll get into more discussion about that as we go. Also included 5 assumptions essential to applying the AAIDD definition. Limitations in present functioning must be considered within the context of community environments typical of the individual's age, peers, and culture. A valid assessment considers cultural and linguistic diversity as well as differences in communication, sensory motor, and behavioral factors. Also within the individual, limitations often coexist with strengths. And the purpose of describing limitations is to develop a profile of needed supports. With appropriate personalized supports over a sustained period, the life functioning of the person with intellectual disability generally will improve. Supports are defined as resources and strategies that aim to promote the development, education, interest, and personal well-being of a person that enhance individual functioning. So let's get into the classifications. The classifications, we actually have 4 different sets, parameters, I guess. We have mild, which is 50 to 55 up to 70 IQ. We have moderate, which is 35 to 40 to that 50 or 55. We have severe, which is 20 to 25 IQ to a 35 to 40 IQ. And then profound is any IQ below 20 to 25 are the different ID category classifications. Standardized IQ tests are used to assess intelligence. They're administered by a school psychologist or other trained professionals. Many schools have one person that they have utilized this. That way they can keep all the testing to be fairly similar as far as how they are given. Important considerations of IQ test. Number one, it's a hypothetical construct. Test measures only how a child performs at one point in time on the items included for the test. So if the student's having a bad day, they're sick, something else is going on that causes the student to not really be totally ingrained in what they need to do, that can affect that. IQ tests can be culturally biased. IQ scores can change significantly. IQ testing is not an exact science. Just an IQ score should not be used as a basis to determine IEP objectives. And the IQ score should never be used as a sole basis for decisions regarding special ed services. You'll have that multifaceted evaluation. Scores changing significantly. What I've always gone off of by a person that was doing our IQ testing is that, from birth or, till early childhood up until 5th grade, they can change pretty, it could be a good change. But that typically after that middle school area, they don't tend to change too much unless there's some other things going on. So that's kind of my take on that changing significantly. I think there's it kind of depends. Assessing adaptive behavior. It's the collection of conceptual, social, and practical skills that have been learned by people in order to function in their everyday lives. So these are typical skills that you and I and many other adults and students have learned throughout our life, whether it be at home, school, wherever it may be, to adapt and do what we need to do. They're exhibited by a person with ID or critical factors in determining the supports a student requires for success in school, work, community, and home environments. Measurement of the adaptive behavior has proven difficult because of the relative nature of social adjustment and competences also in that. And then conceptual using language for speaking, reading, writing, and using number concepts. Social, getting along with others, being a responsible group member and solving social problems, following rules and obeying laws, avoiding being victimized, and practical skills, those daily living activities such as dressing, toiletring, food preparation, etc., are all parts of assessing that adaptive behavior. I want you to look at this. This is normally one that I ask as a group and have groups get together. So I'd like for you to look at the next slide, partner share, and then think of what your answers to those questions would be. So I would pause the video, and then when you come back, we'll talk about what it might mean. But why has prevention of mental retardation, or ID as it's now called, proven so difficult? And what are the most important features of effective instruction for those students with MRID? So if you would, go ahead and look at that, and then pause this video for a second. Okay, want to talk about here, great progress has been made in identifying the causes of ID. Likewise, great advances in preventative medicine have occurred that help identify and treat high-risk pregnancies. However, for a significant amount of percentage of children diagnosed with ID, no known cause can be identified. Even though huge advances in research are needed to further investigate mild medical causes of ID. In addition, approximately 50% of students identified with ID fall in the mild range. For many of those children, evidence suggests that their disabilities can be traced to factors in the environment such as low levels of social engagement, child abuse, and also possibly neglect. Much more needs to be done to provide parents of children at risk with ID with training and support. And they also talk about 6 features of effective training in that second part. Precise definition and task analysis of the new skill to be learned. Direct and frequent measurement of students' performance. Frequent opportunities for active student responding. And immediate and systematic feedback. procedures for achieving the transfer of stimulus control from instructional cues or prompts to naturally occurring stimuli. And finally, strategies for promoting the generalization and maintenance of newly learned skills to different non-training situations. You'll read more in the book, but basically, our students that are ID is going to take lots of repetition to get them to remember. That's why, to me, it's important for transition to work on transition components of their IEP by middle school age, so that they have more time to get those skills learned. But you'll read more out of the book there for that. Characteristics, cognitive functioning and learning, memory, learning rate and attention, generalization and maintenance and motivation are all parts of cognitive functioning and learning. And you definitely want to look and read a little bit more under cognitive functioning, learning rate, and generalization and maintenance and motivation. That you will have more questions, hint, on upcoming quizzes. Adaptive behavior, and talks again about self-care and daily living skills. I really want you to look into social relationships and behavior excesses and challenging behaviors that are discussed in the book, and also discusses positive attributes. Prevalence during 2012-2013 school year, nearly 430,000 students ages 3 to 21 received special education under the category of ID. These represented 6.7% of all school-age children in special education. ID is also the 5th largest disability category, while prevalence rates do vary greatly from state to state. This is a general consensus on this slide. Causes, we talked a little bit about in that group scenario, but more than 350 risk factors are associated with ID. 35% of cases have a genetic cause. Another third of cases involve external trauma or toxin, and then etiology remains unknown for the other third of the cases. And those factors could be prenatal, perinatal, or postnatal. So you kind of want to look at those causes. Those will definitely come up. Some of the biomedical causes are Down syndrome and Fragile X syndrome. Environmental causes, though, 85 to 90% of people with ID have mild intellectual disabilities. Most show no evidence of organic pathology, and psychosocial disadvantage or poverty is also a possible factor for those environmental causes. The biggest single preventative strike against ID was the development of the rubella vaccine back in 1962. Advances in medical science have enabled doctors to identify certain genetic influences using following screening procedures and diagnostic tests. There's ultrasonography, maternal serum screening, amniocentesis, chronic villi sampling, genetic counseling, and mandatory newborn screening tests for inherited and biomedical factors can also be used. Excuse me. Next, we'll go over curriculum goals. Curriculum goals, you'll notice academic, that's kind of academic, content, the basics of reading, writing, and math. Another one, though, that's thrown in here is functional curriculum. Due to the students' issues with ID and their adaptive behavior skills, there's going to need to be a functional curriculum brought into the students' plan. Content to increase the students' independence, self-direction, enjoyment in school, home, community, and work environments, and also self-determination. If you don't know much about self-determination, it's a big part of special education and the success of our students after they are finished with school. And self-determination is a key. Basically content to help the students set goals, plan, and implement a course of action, evaluate their performance, and make adjustments in what they're going to do to reach their goals. While we're here, I'll say it again several times in this course, you need to make sure you're giving the student choices. Many times our students in special ed don't seem to have a choice and don't seem to know many times why they're even in special education. So letting the students know early is a good method to give them some choice. Here's some different instructional methods that you'll want to look at in the book. There's task analysis, which is basically breaking down those complex or multi-steps into smaller tasks. There's active student responses, and then also transfer of stimulus control, gradually and systematically withdrawing response prompts as they go. So more at the beginning, less at the end. Direct and frequent measurement, objective and frequent recording of the performance of behavior. Many times when I have teachers that were in a self-contained ID classroom, there would be some discussion throughout the year that I just don't see them advancing. And me, as a person that was not in the classroom all day long, could definitely see they were advancing. I think at times, especially teachers in the ID area, their advances are smaller maybe compared to what you might see in another student. And so it takes a person's perspective looking in that isn't there every day to let them know that they are making advances and doing quite well. So then I go through the different instructional feedbacks, going over systematic feedback, instructional methods, generalization and maintenance, ideas there that you'll easily get a little more out of the book on that one there. Placement options during the 2012-2013 school year, 17% of students with ID were educated in the general ed classroom. 27% were served in a resource room programs, 49% were served in separate classes, and 7% of the students with intellectual disabilities are educated in separate schools, residential facilities, or home hospital environments. So you can see, if you're a regular ed teacher, you may not see as many. And most of those 17%, I would say, are the mild ID students. There are many times that I would have teachers come and talk to me and say that they really don't see, in looking at a student or being around a student in everyday life, how they would be in special education as an ID student. But as they get into their academics, they can definitely start seeing the repetition needing and some other things related with that. Acceptance and membership. Normalization, the use of progressively more normal settings and procedures to establish and maintain personal behaviors which are culturally normal as possible. Social role valorization, people's welfare depends on the social roles they occupy. And self-determination. Special educators can help students with intellectual disabilities identify their goals and provide instruction and supports. I think some of the biggest thing that I can say here is as a regular ed teacher, you may see a student as ID and go, why are they in our classroom? There are several studies out there that I've seen that show that many of our students learn better, more visual learners than they are a written learner, or some of them may be better auditorily. And getting our students into the classroom, especially in the areas of science, history, where there's a lot more visual things going on with those classrooms, can really help them attain more than what they can get in a special ed classroom. Our special ed teachers are trained well, and they work with the students well. They'll have great strategies. And I hope as a regular ed student, you'll see that. And there's probably, or a regular ed teacher, there's probably a lot of strategies that you could utilize as a regular ed teacher. But also trying to make sure that that special ed student is accepted and part of your classroom if they are out for quite a bit would be a great benefit socially, and be able to see how students in the regular classroom, especially if they've got some behaviors, be able to see some of that can help our students with ID. So that is the end of my notes, but I did want to go back and talk about a couple things here. I guess my phone is just all off the hook today. I'm going to decline that one too. Let's see here. The assignment you're doing this week, the strategies for students identified as ID, is in the assignment section under strategies. And all it basically is you need to list 20 strategies for students with intellectual disabilities. You can get some from the book. You can go online. Strategies to help you in the classroom, strategies to help the students succeed academically, whatever it may be, but 20 strategies for students with intellectual disabilities. So you go ahead, put that on a Word document, and then you go to this section here and upload those 20 ideas that you have. Make sure just to make sure that you all understand, don't use the text box that is in some of these areas as that, because it's very hard for me to be able to read and see what you have down. So do it in a Word document. I know I have that in the syllabus that all of the documents need to be in Word, so you can do that. If you're using Pages or an Apple computer, then please you can export them as a Word document. You can still do them in Pages if that's what you're familiar with, and then export those documents into a Word document onto your computer and then upload it to me. The other thing I want to make sure that you all should be getting ready for your observations coming up. So make sure and call me. That is a good requirement to have right now. That's a 300-point project that you all put a lot of time in, and I don't want to have you have to redo the assignment. So in about 20 minutes of a phone conversation, or if you're on campus, you can schedule an appointment with me. We can go through all of that assignment and probably even a couple others if you have questions on, to make sure that you fully understand how to do the observation report. So that's another my 2 cents on this video for this week. So again, you should have, let me go to now the discussion board for this one. It's the R word for this week. So there is a couple links there that I want you to read over, and then I want you to give your opinion. Two-part discussion, so make sure you put your understanding and your answers to my questions on by Wednesday night, and then make sure and start getting on throughout the week, and make sure and kind of end on Sunday night. That's where you get your full points to make sure you have all the information you need for this discussion board. So if you have any questions, make sure and email or call. I'll be happy to help you in any way. Thank you very much.